Good morning. On Wednesday, Governor Lamont laid out what he hopes will happen during this year's short legislative session. He talked about a $200 to $400 per household tax rebate that could help residents combat high energy costs. He's pitching free breakfast for all students in K through 12. There's a proposal for what he calls a Connecticut option to save on medical costs as well. The governor is joining me in Studio A to talk about all of these things and some of his other priorities. Governor Ned Lamont, welcome.
Hey, Eric.
Tell me about, let's start with that tax rebate, because that got a lot of the headlines. How do you envision this working, and why is that the way you decided to go about this?
Look, it's tough times for a lot of people. Prices are up. Very, very, very cold winter. Heating bills are going to be through the roof. So I said, look, maybe $400 for a couple, that'll help a little bit. I worry about a lot of the big promises coming from the Republicans and Democrats. Let's have $500 billion tax credits, tax cuts as far as the eye can see. I inherited deficits. I don't want deficits to be in our future.
As an incumbent running for re-election, anything you do in this short 13-week session, they're going to say is for a political reason. Chris Powell, the newspaper columnist in papers around the state, referred to the rebate as bribing voters with their own money. The Republicans came out and said, let's get rid of the public benefits charge instead. Why do this? This isn't enough. Do you worry about that criticism, and do you think people will appreciate this, or will they be looking for more?
Let's say there's $1 billion in the so-called public benefits. That's how we pay for nuclear power. That's how we pay for energy efficiency. If the Republicans say you want to eliminate it, you're not going to get free nuclear power. Somebody's going to pay. Maybe they say, let's shove it over and put it on the backs of the taxpayers. Is that really progress? As regards, look, maybe you say $400, not enough money, doesn't really make a difference. I'll let the people of Connecticut decide whether that helps them this winter.
A couple of proposals about schools that you talked about in your speech this past week, and one of them is this breakfast that we mentioned. Why is that an important part of your proposal, and who were you thinking about when you made that proposal?
I was thinking about the kids. I was thinking about starting every day with a full stomach. I was thinking about no stigma, not this kid, but that kid. Now everybody gets that free breakfast. I think makes an enormous difference. There's a lot of people really concerned about food right now. The SNAP benefits, they provide some food support for working families. If that gets cut off, there was a lot of anxiety there. Go to school. Your kid's going to start off the day right.
Sticking with the idea of school, you talked about this cell phone ban. And one thing that I've always found so interesting about this, I have a freshman in high school myself, but a lot of parents don't support this. And I know the statistics say that when the kids don't have the cell phones, they perform better. There's already guidance that says school districts have to do something. Why not just leave it there? Why push forward for this statewide ban? Why not leave it up to districts?
Look, you're right. We got smartphones, not cell phones, smartphones out of the classrooms almost uniformly, with guidance. But I had a lot of concern from superintendents said, look, if we want to go further, bell to bell, get these phones right out of the school, it'd be easier if that was uniform, if everybody did it, rather than Johnny doesn't have to do it over here, but I've got to do it over here. So I responded to the superintendents, and that's what I'm proposing to the legislature.
Do you expect pushback on that? Because that was something that got a lot of attention after your speech.
Look, frankly, a lot of these ideas actually came from Republicans as well. So I think there's bipartisan folks in favor and maybe some opposed. I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's the right thing for the kids. I know there was a little pushback from the kids when we said get out of the classroom. Today, they're all pretty happy where we are.
The things we've talked about so far are all things that our viewers at home can say, oh, I know about that. Education cost sharing is a little wonky, but it still, I think, matters to a lot of people because it really affects their local taxes and what they have to pay for their kids to go to school and pay for their property taxes. Is that something that's part of your proposal, and just education funding in general? Tell us what your ideas are on that, because you talked about that a good bit, too.
Well, so going back about 10 years, the legislature put in place a multi-year ECS, education cost sharing increase. We not only honored that, we accelerated that, got that money to our schools. Now we've said, let's have a broad-based commission to look at education funding for the next 10 years. What's the foundation grant that all schools ought to get? And what's the ECS funding for those schools with special needs? Maybe we can do something in the interim, but this commission is tasked to come back to me in 9 months with a long-term plan how we get this right.
And people here, the government's making a commission to study a problem. Sometimes people cringe. But do you think that there's more data that needs to be gathered before you can make a decision or the legislature can?
Eric, they cringed when I said, let's have a commission to talk about early childhood education. And a year later, we have one of the most robust early childhood there is, because we got all the stakeholders at the table. We did it in a thoughtful way. $300 million in there right now. Universal pre-K, and also for infants and toddlers.
Perhaps the other big reaction that you got was your discussion of ICE, and with federal immigration enforcement agents being in the state, some Republican members of the General Assembly got up and walked out. You got rousing applause from many of the Democratic members. What was the message you were trying to deliver there, and do you worry about stepping into that fray?
I want people to feel safe in the state of Connecticut. I started out by saluting our state police and our municipal police. We have one of the safest states in the country. And I look at Minneapolis and LA and other places, and I see ICE being very disruptive and actually bringing in a lot of folks who, through mass deportation, where our kids are scared to go to school. So I said, let's just take a pause on this.
And were you surprised that people walked out, that members of the General Assembly got up and left?
Look, it's a very heated topic. You know, some people feel very strongly they ought to be hauling these people off the street. I don't. You know, I'm doing everything I can to make sure our kids at Wilbercross High School in New Haven feel safe going there and know that they can go there and continue their education. These are good kids.
Tell me about health care. There's some stuff with hospital funding and some other things, but I think probably the thing that most of our viewers would be interested in is this public option. What do you view it as? What does it look like? Where is that going?
So it's something we brought up early on. It's called the Connecticut option. What it is I've just been shocked. You know, some hospitals charge 50% more than other hospitals. You say, maybe that's because they're a lot better. No, the outcomes are very similar. So what I'm trying to do is to hold down the cost of health care for everybody by saying, look, state employees, retirees, small business, buy in this preferred network. We call it the Connecticut option. You'll be able to save an awful lot of money. It also props up some of our independent hospitals who need it.
And one thing that businesses have talked a lot about is the idea of association health plans, which would also be bringing a lot of people together. That's not been something that your Democratic colleagues have supported largely.
I'm okay with that, but more importantly, these associations come into our Connecticut option. I think you're going to find real savings for small business. I come out of small business. Small businesses get hammered. We don't have a lot of purchasing power like the big guys. This would be very helpful for small business as well.
We have less than a minute left, but you have a 13-week session, the short session, and then a lot of controversial issues. People say, ooh, election year, I don't really want to jump on that. What do you expect to happen? You expect to make a lot of progress?
I think, remember, we've got a budget. We did a 2-year budget less than a year ago. Now we're maybe making some tweaks on it, but we're in the middle of a 2-year budget cycle. You know, really big, bold initiatives will stay for the regular session next year. But in the meantime, look, we're doing some really important things. I think you can have a real sense of where we're going on health care, how we're bringing down the cost of housing, and our plans on energy to bring down costs there, starting with $400 for your family.
All right. Governor Ned Lamont, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate you coming back. You were just here a few weeks ago. Back to give us the details. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Eric.